A voice, both urgent and hushed, cut through the cabin's hum. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you." Keisha Brown looked up, startled, from her sleeping son. A flight attendant was leaning over her expression calm but her tone firm. "You're not supposed to be on this aircraft," she explained quietly. "Your ticket was issued to a Julianne Dawson. It seems there's been a mix-up." Keisha's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled her son, Malik, closer instinctively. "But I boarded at the correct gate," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I'm sure you did, but your name isn't on our passenger list," the attendant replied. "Since we've already pushed back, we can't go back to the terminal. You'll have to remain in your seat until we land, and we'll sort this out then." Keisha stared, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She could feel the stares of other passengers, hear their murmurs, and her breath caught in her throat. "I didn't intend to cause any trouble," she whispered. "You're not in trouble," the attendant reassured her. "This happens more than you'd imagine. Just stay seated." Keisha managed a faint nod, swallowing hard against the tightness in her throat. Malik stirred in his sleep before settling again. She lowered her head, pressing her face into his soft hair, wishing she could simply vanish. Only a few hours before, she had been waiting in the terminal. Her hair was pulled back in a simple puff, her oversized coat doing little to hide the exhaustion that shadowed her eyes. At 29, she looked older, worn down by the relentless demands of single motherhood. She was on her way to her mother's house, a trip made possible by months of scrimping and saving. Malik's asthma was flaring up again, and her mom had insisted she come home for support. Keisha had finally relented. The airport had been a chaotic surge of people. When her flight was called, she was jostled by the crowd, pushing toward the gate. She never felt her boarding pass slip from her pocket. Another one lay on the floor nearby, and in her harried state, she scooped it up, assuming it was hers. She didn't see the name Julianne Dawson at the top. The agent at the gate, seeing a tired young mother with a sleeping child, barely glanced at the pass before waving her through without checking her ID. And so, there she sat, on a plane headed to a destination she never intended to visit. It was too late to undo the error. Her face was hot with shame as Malik shifted in her lap. She rocked him gently, trying to calm her own ragged breathing while the whispers of those around her swirled in the air. Someone glanced her way, then quickly looked away. Keisha stared blankly ahead, her vision blurring. The man next to her had remained completely silent through the entire ordeal. She hadn't dared to look at him until now. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a man in his early 30s, maybe a bit older, with dark hair and a calm demeanor. He was dressed in a well-fitting charcoal jacket, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He hadn't stirred or shown any reaction at all. His stillness wasn't cold, it felt considerate. She shut her eyes, fighting back the urge to cry. The quiet presence beside her was strangely soothing. Her son sighed in his sleep, and she kissed his head, grounding herself in his familiar scent. She had made a mistake, but it wasn't born of recklessness. It was a product of pure exhaustion, a byproduct of her life as a mother. The flight attendant moved on, and gradually the whisper subsided, replaced by the drone of the engines. Keisha sat in the quiet, her heart still pounding, wondering what would happen when they landed and if, by some strange twist of fate, this monumental error was leading her somewhere she was meant to be. The aircraft had been taxiing for a few minutes when the flight attendant returned to Keisha's row, her voice still quiet, but now laced with kindness. "It was our error," she admitted. "The other passenger has been rerouted. Since we've already left the gate, you can stay on board. We will provide assistance for you after we land." Keisha nodded, her cheeks still flushed with embarrassment. She carefully adjusted Malik, whose head was now lolling to the side. As she tucked a loose coil of hair behind her ear and let out a shaky breath, a subtle movement beside her drew her attention. The man in the aisle seat, James Whitmore, leaned forward. He quietly slipped off his coat, folded it neatly, and with deliberate care, tucked it under her son's head as a makeshift pillow. He did it all without a word, without meeting her gaze. He simply made sure the boy was comfortable before resuming his silent posture. Keisha whispered a soft, "Thank you." He acknowledged her with a single nod. Outside the window, the day's last light was surrendering to dusk. Inside the cabin, the steady hum of the engines was the only sound. Keisha leaned back in her seat, feeling a bit of the tension leave her shoulders. The man hadn't spoken a single word to her, yet his presence was grounding and gentle. As the plane finally lifted into the sky, he spoke. "Rough day," he observed. She turned, surprised by the sound of his voice. "More like a rough year," she replied with a humorless smile. "Fair enough," he conceded. She paused, then decided to continue. "I was supposed to be flying to my mom's. I thought I had everything right, but clearly not." He glanced at her son. "At least you're not flying alone." A genuine smile touched her lips. "This is Malik. He's 3. It's been a difficult few months for him. His asthma is severe, and I was working double shifts just to keep up with his medication costs. My mom offered to help out for a bit, so that's where we were supposed to be headed." James didn't interrupt or offer any empty reassurances. He just listened. "I'm a waitress," she went on, "mostly evenings and weekends. It was all I could find after my husband passed away. It was a car accident 2 years ago this February." Her voice wavered, but she pushed through the emotion. "I've been managing, I suppose. Just so tired. Some days, it feels like the weight of the world is on my shoulders, and I'm using every ounce of strength I have not to shatter." He nodded in understanding. "I'm familiar with that feeling." His voice was low, but something in its tone made her look at him more closely. She saw a shadow in his eyes, a depth of unspoken pain. "There have been times," she admitted slowly, "when I've wished I could just get on the wrong plane. Start over somewhere new, a place with no bills, no grief, no 2 a.m. trips to the emergency room." He tilted his head slightly. "Sounds like today you got your wish." She let out a soft laugh, though her smile quickly faded. "I used to wonder if I was cursed, as if the universe had some personal grudge against me." She looked down at Malik, gently stroking his hair. "But maybe it isn't a curse," she whispered. "Maybe my path is just longer and more complicated than most people's." A profound silence settled between them. "I used to believe I was broken," she confessed. "But tonight, I'm starting to think that maybe I'm not." The man turned to face the window, the cabin lights reflecting in the glass and glinting in his eyes. He remained silent, but she saw a subtle change in him. His shoulders relaxed, and the tension in his jaw eased. Keisha leaned back, holding her son a little tighter. Malik snuggled into the folded coat beneath his head, sleeping soundly. The plane moved steadily onward, soaring high above a city neither of them had planned to visit. Yet perhaps it was exactly where they were both meant to be. The plane droned on, a steady vibration in the dim, quiet cabin. Most of the other passengers were asleep or lost in their own thoughts. The overhead lights had been lowered to a gentle glow. Keisha shifted carefully, glancing at Malik, who was still deeply asleep on her chest. She let out a long, slow breath as the emotional chaos of the day began to settle into a weary calm. Beside her, James spoke again. "I had a daughter." His voice was even but low, carrying the weight of a fragile memory. "She passed away 5 years ago," he continued, "just a couple of weeks before she would have turned 4. Keisha looked over at him, her own breath catching. Malik had just turned 3. A knot formed in her stomach. "Her name was Lily," he said. She had this tiny gap between her front teeth and a wild, infectious laugh that would make strangers stop and smile. She was pure joy, loud, fearless, and incredibly stubborn. A faint smile touched his lips, but vanished as quickly as it appeared. "She got sick so suddenly. At first, we thought it was a cold, then some kind of virus. It wasn't. It was leukemia, and it was aggressive. The kind where treatments only buy you a little more time, but never enough. We spent months living in hospitals. I can still picture the tile patterns in every waiting room floor." Keisha remained quiet, not wanting to disturb the delicate space he was creating as he finally unburdened himself. "After she was gone, we tried," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "My wife and I, we really try to be okay. But grief is a strange thing. You think you're in it together, But really, you're just two people surviving alongside each other in separate worlds. He stared straight ahead. Some nights, I need to talk about Lily, about every little detail of her life. But my wife couldn't stand to hear her name. Other nights, she needed to cry, but by then I'd walled myself off, completely numb. It felt like we were always missing each other. Keisha nodded slowly, a lump forming in her throat. The fight started, he added, about stupid things. The dishes, the bills, the crushing silences. She accused me of never being there. I told her I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. He looked down at his hands, his fingers flexing unconsciously. 2 years after Lily died, we signed the divorce papers. There were no custody fights, no yelling, just silence and signatures. Keisha's heart ached for him, not just for the child he had lost, but for the entire life that had crumbled in the wake of that loss. Since then, it's just been me, he concluded. Work, business trips, empty hotel rooms. I tell myself I'm staying busy, but the truth is, I think I'm just hiding. She hesitated for a beat, then gently reached out and placed her hand on top of his. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice soft. He didn't pull back. His hand remained under hers, still and heavy. I've never told anyone all of that before, he admitted after a long moment. Not like that. Not all at once. Keisha's reply was barely a whisper. I think sometimes God allows two people with the same kinds of scars to find each other, just so they can remember they're not the only ones still hurting. He turned his head slightly to meet her eyes. They were glassy, rimmed with a raw, unspoken grief. She would have been 8 this year, he said. I wonder who she would have become. I wonder if she'd still love that silly cartoon about the dancing frogs. I kept all the DVDs. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Keisha offered a gentle smile. Malik is obsessed with one about singing trucks. I've seen it so many times I hear the theme song in my dreams. He let out the smallest of chuckles, his shoulders rising and falling with the sound. You're a good mom, he said quietly. She blinked. You don't even know me. I didn't need to, he replied. I saw it in the way you were so embarrassed about a mistake that wasn't even your fault, and how through it all, you never once let go of him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, as if a dam inside him had finally broken, a single tear traced a path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't try to hide it. It was the first time in 5 years he had allowed himself to truly cry for his daughter. Keisha said nothing. She didn't offer a solution or a platitude. She just held his hand, her touch steady and warm, letting the silence settle between them like a soft, heavy blanket of shared understanding. Outside the window, the night stretched on, dark and endless. But for the first time in a very long time, James Whitmore didn't feel so alone in it. The plane touched down with a gentle jolt, its wheels groaning as they met the tarmac. The familiar roar of deceleration filled the cabin as overhead bins clicked open and passengers began to stir, reaching for their belongings. The lights flashed on, casting a harsh, sterile glow on weary faces. Keisha shifted, adjusting Malik, who blinked his eyes open, momentarily disoriented before burrowing deeper into her embrace. She absently smoothed his hair, her mind still catching up to the sudden end of their journey. After hours of shared tension, confession, and silent communion, the abrupt return to the real world felt jarring. A flight attendant appeared at her row, speaking in a low, polite tone. Miss, when we deplane, an airline representative will be waiting for you at the gate. They'll assist you with getting rebooked to your original destination, Keisha nodded, the weight of the logistical nightmare ahead already settling on her shoulders. She glanced at the man beside her, who remained seated and composed, though a faint line had appeared between his brows, signaling some unspoken thought. As the seatbelt sign switched off, the cabin burst into activity. People stood, retrieved their luggage, and checked their phones. Keisha remained still, her son murmuring softly in his sleep. She waited in her seat until most of the passengers had filed into the aisle. Then, she carefully gathered her bag, settled Malik on her hip, and turned slightly to face the man who had been her silent companion on a flight she was never meant to take. I'm sorry about all of this, she said quietly. For the mix-up, for everything. He simply shook his head once. Don't be. She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the strap of her bag. My name is Keisha, she offered, as if remembering that detail only now mattered. Thank you for not making me feel like a problem. And for listening. His lips parted as if he was about to say something, but the words wouldn't come. She gave him a tired but genuine smile. You made a very strange night feel a lot less scary. And with that, she stepped into the aisle and began to walk away. He watched her go, Malik's small legs dangling against her side, her form quickly swallowed by the moving crowd in the narrow jet bridge. She didn't look back. She didn't offer a phone number. She hadn't even mentioned her last name. And yet, in just a few quiet hours, she had revealed more of her true self to him than most people he'd known for years. James sat motionless as the row around him emptied. The cabin was now quiet, the last of the passengers gone. He stared at the seat she had just vacated, the fabric still holding a trace of warmth, a faint scent of baby powder and something soft, like lavender, hanging in the air. He wasn't a man given to flights of fancy or deep longing. His life was governed by logic, schedules, and contracts. But now, in the stillness, an unfamiliar ache pulled at him, too profound for such a brief encounter. There was an unguarded honesty in her eyes, a raw vulnerability in her exhaustion, her embarrassment, and her quiet strength. He was struck by the way she had spoken of her son, her struggles, and her pain without a trace of self-pity. She simply was without apology. And for a few hours, he had felt something stir within him that he thought had died along with Lily. He stood up slowly and reached for his coat, his fingers brushing against the seatbelt buckle she had just unfastened. He wondered if he should have asked for her last name, for a number, for anything. But the moment was gone. She had disappeared. All he was left with was a first name, a memory, and the overwhelming feeling that something incredibly real and rare had just slipped through his grasp. As he stepped off the plane, the cacophony of the terminal surrounded him. Screens flashed flight information, announcements echoed from above, and people rushed past, but it all felt strangely muted. Somewhere up ahead, a woman named Keisha was being led away to fix a mistake. But to him, the only mistake was not having found a way to hold on to the person who had just walked out of his life. He couldn't get her out of his head. Days had passed since the flight, but Keisha lingered in James's thoughts like a song he couldn't stop humming. He replayed the sound of her voice, the gentle curve of her tired smile, and the fierce, quiet devotion with which she held her son. He remembered how she had thanked him, not out of mere politeness, but with a sincerity that made the simple words feel profound. He didn't even know her last name. He had the resources to find her, of course. A call to the airline, a look at the manifest. It would be easy, but the idea felt wrong, like an intrusion. Keisha Brown deserved more than to be tracked down like a misplaced piece of luggage. So, he did something else instead. Sitting at his large desk early one morning, James typed a short email to his company's internal communications department. He wasn't entirely sure why he was doing it. He just felt a deep need to put the experience into words. The note was simple, a thank you to a stranger, a reflection on how a single, unexpected encounter can stay with you long after you've deplaned. She boarded by mistake, he wrote, asterisk, but her presence was anything but. She was a reminder that people carry inherent goodness, even when they are exhausted and facing uncertainty. She held her son as if he were the only thing that mattered in the universe. She spoke with an honesty I haven't encountered in years. I never learned her full name, but I will not forget her star. He hit send, not expecting it to go anywhere. A few days later, a junior writer from the marketing team named Ellie reached out. She had read his note and been deeply moved. We would love to share this, she proposed. As an anonymous story, of course. Just initials. We think it might resonate with people the way it resonated with our team. After a brief moment of hesitation, James agreed. The post went live on the company's public blog with the title, "Some flights aren't mistakes. You just don't know the destination yet." It spread with incredible speed. People shared it across social media with captions like, "This gave me chills," and faith in humanity restored, the comment section filled with stories of transformative encounters with strangers, of chance meetings that felt fated. James read every single one. And across the country, in the small break room of the diner where she worked weekends, Keisha's phone buzzed. It was a message from a former coworker containing only a link and a short line of text. Asterisk, this sounds like you. You should read it, star. She clicked on it out of curiosity, not expecting anything significant. But as her eyes scanned the words, her breath caught. It was him. He hadn't used her name or described her physical appearance, but every detail was there. Her son, the wrong flight, the exhaustion, the raw honesty, the feeling that their meeting was too real to be a coincidence. Tears welled in her eyes. She sank onto a nearby bench, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. Malik was coloring at a small table, humming a soft tune. She wiped at her cheek, tried to regain her composure, but the emotion was already spilling over. "Mommy." Malik looked up, his expression puzzled. "Why are you crying?" Keisha managed to smile through her tears. "I'm okay, sweetie." He studied her more closely. "Is it because of the coat, man?" She let out a quiet, watery laugh and nodded. "Yes, baby. It's because of the coat, man." "Did he lose his coat?" "No," she whispered, brushing a hand through his hair. "I think he found something. And maybe I did too." She sat for a long time, the phone resting in her lap, staring at the final sentences of the post. An editor's note at the bottom encouraged anyone who might recognize themselves in the story to get in touch. Keisha hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she opened her email app. She began to type a short message, just a few lines. She didn't explain the whole story. She didn't have to. She simply wrote that she believed she was the woman from the flight, that she had read his words, and that they had found her. When she hit send, her hands were still shaking, but for the first time in a very long time, the trembling wasn't from fear. It was from the fragile, beautiful weight of finally being seen. James was standing by the expansive window of his office when the intercom buzzed. "There's a Keisha here to see you." Sir, he didn't reply immediately. His gaze was fixed on the city skyline, but his breath had hitched in his chest. When he finally turned, he felt a powerful shift inside him, a mix of hope and profound nervousness. "Send her up," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. A few minutes later, Keisha stepped into the room. She was wearing a simple blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back neatly, her eyes wide with a gentle uncertainty. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then, she offered a soft smile, and it was as if a quiet, locked door inside him had just swung open. "You really wrote that?" she asked. He nodded. "I really did." Her eyes scanned the office, the warm wood tones, the photographs of smiling children, the inspirational quotes about resilience on the walls. "This is beautiful," she said. "All of it." He gestured toward a chair. "Do you have time for lunch?" They walked to a quiet restaurant nearby, a place with earthy decor and sunlight streaming through tall windows. As they sat down, the silence between them felt different than it had on the plane. Not awkward, but charged with a hopeful anticipation. He asked about her life, not just polite questions, but real ones. He asked about Malik, about how she was truly managing, about what she wanted for herself beyond just survival. She paused, then confessed, "I used to dream about becoming a counselor. I wanted to help young moms like me, the ones who feel scared, alone, and invisible. But I had to let that dream go a long time ago." James listened intently, not interrupting once. He watched her as she spoke, as if every word she uttered was precious. When their food arrived, she ate slowly, her nerves making it hard to concentrate. "I know it sounds silly," she added. "Dreams don't seem to matter much when rent is due and your child needs medicine. But they do matter," he said softly. "They matter more than almost anything." Keisha looked at him, really looked at him, for a long moment. Then, as casually as if he were passing the salt, he said, "I'd like to offer you a job." Her fork stopped midair. "At the Phoenix Foundation," he clarified. "I started it after Lily passed. We're expanding our services. We work with single-parent families, providing scholarships, mentorship, and healthcare access. But we're missing a key element. We need someone who truly understands what these women are going through. She blinked, stunned. Wait, me? I don't have a degree. I don't have a real resume. You have what they need, he insisted gently. You've lived it. You know all the things the textbooks leave out. Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back. You don't even really know me. I know enough, he said. And if I'm wrong, you can walk away any time you want. Keisha looked down at her hands, speechless. After a long pause, her voice softer than ever, she said, No one has ever believed in me like that before. After lunch, they walked through a nearby park. The leaves on the trees rustled above them as their footsteps fell slowly on the stone path. I thought about you a lot, Keisha admitted. So did I, James confessed. He told her how the silence after she left the plane had felt louder than any noise he had heard in years. He told her that for the first time since losing Lily, he had felt something stir inside him, something real and alive. They paused near a small fountain, the water glistening in the sun, catching fractured images of their reflections. I used to tell myself I didn't need anyone, Keisha said. But I think the truth is, I just didn't believe anyone would ever stay. James looked at her. You stayed in my mind, Keisha. That has to mean something, she smiled, her eyes full of a question she wasn't quite ready to ask. They walked back slowly toward the street, where a cab was already waiting at the curb. She turned to face him, her hand on the car door. Thank you for today, she said. For everything. He hesitated. Then, just as she began to open the door, he stepped closer. Keisha, she looked up. He took a breath, his voice low but unwavering. I used to think I didn't have a heart anymore. That maybe when Lily died, it just stopped beating. She froze, her hand still on the door handle. But today, he said, his eyes locking with hers, if I don't reach for your hand right now, I'm afraid I'll lose the last beat I have left. The city sound seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, suspended in a moment that hung between yes and no. Without a word, she reached out and took his hand. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt like they were standing alone. Keisha arrived at the Phoenix Foundation for her first day of work with a heart full of nervous excitement and a second-hand blazer that still smelled faintly of lavender detergent. She had never worked in an office. Her life had been a whirlwind of split shifts, sticky restaurant tables, and the constant stress of scraping together enough money for rent. But now, she walked into a place that didn't just want her labor, it wanted her story. James introduced her to the team as someone who has lived our mission more than any of us ever could. There was no condescension in his voice, not a hint of charity, only profound respect. Her official title was Community Support Liaison, but her real job was to listen. She listened to mothers who sobbed in her office, to teenagers balancing babies on their hips, and to women who had learned to bear their burdens in silence. And when they were done talking, she offered them the invaluable gifts of understanding, encouragement, and pieces of her own journey. Day by day, she felt herself becoming more confident, more grounded. She helped design new support programs, streamlined the intake process for families, and even participated in scholarship interviews. Her insights were raw and real, and they were invaluable. The board listened to her, and James listened. At home, life began to transform as well. Malik was enrolled in a specialized preschool for children with respiratory issues, and he began to thrive. He made friends, his coughing spells grew less frequent, and his laughter filled their small apartment more easily. For the first time, Keisha didn't have to choose between buying groceries and buying inhalers. James visited often, sometimes with a clear purpose, but often just to drop off a book for Malik or bring a container of soup he claimed was extra from staff lunch. Malik started by calling him Mr. Whitmore, which soon became Uncle James and, eventually, Mommy's friend James. Keisha never corrected him. There was no grand declaration of love, no formal conversation about their feelings. Instead, in the quiet spaces between meetings and late afternoon coffees, something beautiful began to bloom. She saw it in the way he instinctively held doors open for her, and how he would stay late at the office just to keep her company when she was feeling overwhelmed, and in the late-night text that simply asked, "How was your day?" and then genuinely waited for her answer. He saw it in her laughter, which was slowly returning, real and unforced, like the first signs of spring after a long, hard winter. He saw in the way she remembered the name of every single mother who walked through the foundation's doors, and in the small, caring way she always left his office a little neater than she had found it. Their love didn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It came like the dawn, gentle, slow, and warming everything it touched. There were dinners, simple meals of pasta and roasted vegetables, sometimes at his apartment, sometimes at hers, often including Malik's favorite dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. Keisha laughed more. James softened. Sometimes, after Malik was asleep, they would sit on her worn-out couch with cups of tea, talking about everything and nothing at all. One evening, as Keisha was folding laundry, James quietly picked up one of Malik's tiny socks and started to help. She looked at him, amused. "I'm pretty sure the CEO of the company doesn't need to be folding my son's pajamas," she teased. He just shrugged. It's oddly calming. They shared a smile, and for a long moment, neither of them looked away. Sometimes, when Keisha was exhausted, a bone-deep tired that only single mothers can truly understand, he would simply pull a blanket over her shoulders without a word and sit quietly nearby until she drifted off to sleep. Malik adored him. He would save his best drawings to give to Uncle James and insisted that he be the one to come to his class's special person day. "Why me?" James had asked once, crouching down to tie the little boy's shoe. "Because you always come back," Malik answered with the simple, profound logic of a child. Keisha overheard from the kitchen and had to turn away before she started to cry. That was the difference. James stayed. He didn't try to fix her past or pretend he could erase his own. He simply stood beside her, in the quiet moments, in the chaotic ones, and in the healing. And Keisha, who was once so sure she was too broken to be loved, found herself slowly, gently unfolding. She wasn't becoming someone new. She was becoming the person she was always meant to be, someone who could love again and be loved in return, gently, consistently, and completely. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden shafts of light across the freshly painted white walls of the newly opened center. The sound of children's laughter bounced off the tile floors as they ran around with balloons. Volunteers served refreshments, and there were name tags, warm hugs, and tearful smiles from women who never imagined someone would build a place like this just for them. The Phoenix Center for Single Parents had once been a dream, and now it was real, warm, and vibrantly alive. Keisha stood near the entrance, her arms wrapped loosely around herself as she watched it all. She wore a simple, elegant pale blue dress, her hair gently tucked behind her ears. Beside her, Malik clung tightly to her hand, happily munching on a cookie and grinning at every person who walked by. She wasn't sure where James had gone until she saw him step onto the small platform at the front of the room and clear his throat into the microphone. "Thank you all," he began, his voice strong and steady. "Not just for being here today, but for believing in this vision, a place where stories are valued, where resilience is celebrated, and where no one has to walk their path alone." A wave of soft applause filled the room. Keisha smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "But before we officially close today's event," he continued, "I have one last thing I'd like to say. Or rather, something I'd like to ask." And then, in front of everyone, he stepped down from the platform and began walking straight toward her. The room grew quiet. Keisha blinked, confused, until he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He knelt down before her. The crowd let out a collective gasp. Keisha's hand flew to her mouth as tears instantly rushed to her eyes. "This belonged to my mother," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "She gave it to me years ago and told me, when you find the woman who reminds you that your heart still beats, you give this to her." He opened the box. Inside lay a delicate gold ring with a single small stone that caught the light like a captured star. "I never thought I would love again, Keisha," he said, his gaze locked on hers. "I truly didn't think I was capable of it. But then you boarded the wrong flight, and you turned out to be everything I never even knew I was searching for." He took a steadying breath. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Keisha's cheeks as she laughed. a soft, disbelieving sound overflowing with joy. She could only nod, too overcome with emotion to speak. Then, she bent down, pulled him into a fierce embrace, and whispered in his ear, "I used to think no one could ever love a person like me. But I was wrong. Love finds the heart that still dares to hope." The room erupted in applause. Malik clapped louder than anyone, his smile stretching from ear to ear. They held each other in the middle of it all, surrounded by a crowd of people, but existing in their own quiet, perfect world. Weeks later, the three of them boarded a plane. This trip was their first vacation as a family. Malik sat by the window, his face pressed against the glass in wonder. Keisha sat in the middle, with James on the aisle. Their fingers were intertwined, resting gently on the armrest between them. As the plane began its ascent, Keisha looked out at the clouds, her eyes shimmering. She leaned her head on James's shoulder, her voice low but certain. "This time," she said with a radiant smile, "it's the right flight. Sometimes, the wrong flight takes you exactly where you were always meant to be." Keisha Brown had boarded an airplane with nothing but heartache, exhaustion, and a sleeping 3-year-old in her arms. And somehow, she had landed in the life of a man who saw her inherent worth, not her wounds. Love doesn't always arrive with a roar. Sometimes it shows up quietly, gently, and takes the beautiful shape of a second chance. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel, where real-life miracles and emotional journeys come alive. Your next favorite story is just a click away. Subscribe now and never miss a moment that could change how you see love, life, and the power of resilience.